So I'm going to talk about automated testing of medical devices. So for the purposes of US medical devices, software that interfaces with a medical device is considered to be a medical device. So if you're writing an application that works on iOS or Android, or even a web page that perhaps has something to do with how your IOT medical device functions, it is indeed a medical device. And you have to conform to the testing standards. A little bit of background about me. I've done pretty much everything. I currently herd cats. I manage a QA team and all of the releases, which is like herding cats. I like to make working software that doesn't wake me up in the middle of the night. I have people that do that for me. They are far more important. So I do not like being paged. This presentation relates to work that I did at my previous gig at Orthogonal. They are a medical device software company. I no longer work for them, but they're still doing this type of work. And mostly they've actually been focusing on the medical device testing side of things. People actually contract out firms to write their medical device tests because it's it's an arduous process. Medical devices come in classes. So a class 1 device is something that has very low harm. If you misuse it, if it breaks, you are not going to die. In fact, nothing bad will happen to you at all, likely, is the situation. You have a class 3 medical device that malfunctions, bad things will happen. You could die, fires could start, bad things could happen. In general, big companies make class 3 devices because there is a lot of risk involved. And those smaller companies make a lot of class 1 devices because the risk is lower. You're much less likely to be sued because people are not likely to be harmed if your product doesn't work as expected. And there's also, with each class comes increased regulatory requirements in terms of what you need to do testing-wise, what needs to happen as you're creating the software, what your documentation needs are, how you support your users, and all of that. Verification and validation. So this is the most difficult part of writing medical device software. This is the part where the FDA agrees to approve or not approve your device. This is where you document that your device works as expected. For the project that I worked on, our validation or verification and validation document, our V&V for short, was over 100 pages long. We had over 70 test cases in that, which actually really isn't a lot. It's really not a lot of test cases, but it's 100 pages long, and it takes manually a very long time to execute that, probably on the order of 2 days to execute that. It's a long process. Typically, a VMV is done using written test scripts that a tester manually executes every time. This is long. It takes a long time. You need devices, and in our situation, we had a small medical device that increased tier production by providing a slight charge to the inside of your nose. And we had a piece of application software, an iOS application. So in order to test the iOS application, which is what the company I was working for had written and was doing the validation and verification and validation for, we needed to have multiple versions of the IOT device in different states to do the testing. We also needed multiple phones, and we needed emulators or simulators. So you need a lot of stuff at your disposal to make that all work out. Automated functional tests are permissible to be used, but they need to be written in the same format. They need to be human readable, because the people that are going to analyze your document and make sure you've covered all of your requirements cannot read code. The benefits of an automated VMV. So you get all the benefits of testing in an automated fashion. So we had about 25 to 30 automated V&V tests. We could run those in about 30 minutes, which meant we could run those on every build that we got. We could run those on the dev branch if we needed to. We could run those everywhere we needed to for a quick check on our software, which was a huge win because we could say whether it worked or didn't work at pretty much any given point in time. So we ran them as a part of our, constantly, several times a day. We actually grabbed a laptop and said, like, this laptop just runs tests. That's all it does. You can also, depending on how you have things set up, for us, we couldn't, make use of something like a device farm because we needed to interface with the IOP medical device. But if you can make use of a device farm, you can test on a wide range of operating systems and on a wide range of devices, which gives you really good coverage and a good idea of if your software is working as you expect. So the biggest challenge, I think, for writing the automated tests is that these really have to be UI-based tests. They have to be included in the V&V document. They need to go lockstep. So with this document, it has like a change log and change requests, and you have to put that out, and it has to be approved. It's a process. You write it, but you're never done writing it. You write your first draft, and that might get approved, but you need to add a test case or requirement changes. And you need to change the entire document to deal with that. So when you write automated tests, you have to remember as an extra step that when you go and change your automated tests, that if you've changed the way any screens are ordered, or if that then you need to make sure that you've updated your test cases in the document, because they need to match, because it needs to be both human readable and human runnable and computer runnable. Because there are reasons why you may opt to take your automated tests and run them manually using a person. Simulators, they're so awesome, but they don't have Bluetooth. This is a really sad moment for people that are dealing with IOP medical devices, because I don't know about you, but it gets very expensive when you gotta go out and have a small iPhone, a medium-sized iPhone, a big iPhone. You need last year's iPhone. You need this year's iPhone. When the new iPhone comes out, you need that iPhone that day. It starts to get very expensive. And then you need to distribute that among your team. And your testers, at one point in time, I carried 5 phones in my bag. Every day to and from work, I carried 5 phones, which is crazy. My computer was cheaper than all of the phones in a makeup bag. It's crazy. But there are no simulators, or there's no Bluetooth on a simulator. So you can't go with the easy solution. You wind up having to do something that's more complicated, unfortunately. Last year, unfortunately, it wasn't quite as big of a deal this year, but last year there were serious problems in the move from Swift 2 to Swift 3, as in every single automated functional testing tool broke. It was a very challenging time for us. We had a whole suite of tests. We had to rewrite all of them because in the end, they did not work anymore. It was very frustrating. I think library issues are a big one that you run into on that side of things. So if my developers had asked me to test my stuff when they made the switch, I would have said, oh wait, none of my stuff works. I'm sorry, we cannot move. You must stay on Swift 2 for a little while. That's kind of a common problem that you run into anytime there's upgrades or changes. But it was a really frustrating situation for us because it set us back several weeks. And there was a period of time where nothing was working. It worked on simulators, but we needed physical devices. It had to work on physical devices for us. So we were waiting like everyone else. It was very frustrating. Cucumber. So I have a love-hate relationship with Cucumber. It's beautiful. It's very easy to read. It's lovely. It is terrible to maintain. The step files get out of control. My background's in development, and I was quite comfortable modifying step files. This didn't really seem like a lot of work to me. This wasn't too crazy. But the rest of my testing team had no development experience, and they were incredibly intimidated by the step files. It was very overwhelming for them, and they get kind of big and gangly and out of control, especially if people that are working in them don't, they're still learning programming skills with how to write methods and when to break things up into classes and how to distribute all of, how to properly manage all of that. Because that's really, it's not, if your background isn't development, it's not obvious what you need to do there. And if you're an inexperienced developer, it's even harder because you're trying to get stuff done. With the testing team, you don't get a lot of time, right? The software comes to you, everybody wants it tested right away. Why isn't it tested yet? Because this takes time. You gave the developers 2 weeks. I get half a day. That's kind of crazy. But that is the world in which you live in sometimes. There's some really beautiful things that help you to include your Cucumber steps in your V&V documents. So all of our manual tests and all of our Cucumber tests, they followed the same setup. So if you didn't know that something was an automated test, you would have had no idea reading the document because we used the same language in each place. So we had a custom login method. So we'd say something like, given the application has opened, then I log in. And that was the same 2 lines in every single one of our test cases, whether it was a manual test or an automated test. We also had other custom steps that we had written, like, I think we had something like, we were having a hard time with something that was clicking, and so we had developed our own, wait until something happens step because one of the waits was not working for us. We also had things where we waited for the animations to finish in both our automated and manual tests. So you could say, I'm waiting for none animating, I'm waiting for nothing to be animating on the screen. And it's pretty easy for a person to read that and understand, like, oh, we want the animations to finish, and then we want to push all the buttons, which is helpful because if your automated testing solutions are not going to work while the screen is still animating, but for a person, that would be a step you'd kind of skip. But then you've actually documented that your animations exist, and they're a part of your protocol and a part of your application. So it's kind of an extra layer there. As you execute Cucumber, each line prints out, which allowed us to basically say where a test would fail, which is what you need to mark on your V&V document. These things are big tables. Each step is laid out. You can then mark, oh yes, it passed or it failed. And that's very helpful. For us, it made things a lot better. We use tags extensively. So in a V&V document, you give your test cases numbers that are, I don't know, like TTMAC028, and you want to tag your test that way. You can also run them. You can say, I want to run TTMAC, :08 or 028, and you can run the exact test that you want to run. This is really helpful because when you run a V&V document, it's meant to be run in order. You're not to skip, you're not to go ahead, you're not to move. It's an ordered document, which is against everything in how we test, because we would like to not have dependencies in our tests, but they assume dependencies. So our V&V document could actually be run in any order. We'd set that up in that situation, and there were 2 tests that needed to come right after each other. That was simply because we changed a setting, and we wanted to test that when you did one, you changed the setting, that the next time you opened the app, the thing worked as expected. And so we had 2 out of 78 that were order dependent. It's helpful. So you have some options for frameworks. So Appium has Cucumber implementations in Java and Ruby. Calabash, which was actually what we wound up using on our project, because that worked when Appium was not yet functional. I would have preferred to use Appium. It's just a better tool, had more options, but we used Calabash. It uses Cucumber with Ruby. Those are basically your options. If you had a web page that was interfacing with a medical device or providing medical device information or displaying the output from your medical device to you so that you could, make decisions about your health, you could use Selenium to test that with Cucumber as well. You can run tests a lot faster on a simulator, but physical devices go really, 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 really slow. Like really slow. You have to connect them, and you can't, especially if it's better if you can use a device farm, but if that isn't an option for you, then you're stuck. You're kind of having to run them manually. The only option we'd even thought of how you could possibly have set that up was to set up a TeamCity build server with a phone connected to it that doesn't lock, because you need to have your phone unlocked to run the tests. So you'd need to have turned locking off on your phone. And if we had worked on the project longer, we would have actually connected a Mac MIDI with TeamCity and gone in that direction. In the end, that was, the project ended, so we didn't take that step. But we had thought through how we were going to maintain the need to test on physical devices, have things as a part of a build process. We wanted to be able to run them remotely because you can kick off a TeamCity build remotely. But we didn't get that far. But it was pretty cool. It's a good idea. The simulator has just a much better range of iOS versions. You can't possibly carry around all the phones that you need. It's just not possible. You can't, iOS makes it incredibly difficult to not update your phone. I updated my kid's phone accidentally last week. He lost half his games. He's very upset. And I was like, this is an irreversible action. And he was like, what? You can't go back in time? I was like, no. He's like, but you can always go back. And I was like, nope. Once you have updated iOS, you have updated iOS. That is a permanent decision. And it makes it very difficult, especially the further along you get in the adoption process. Like, it starts getting really aggressive and reminding you to update your phone every time. So we would sometimes hand off a phone to a developer because they needed to test with our phone, and they would upgrade it from iOS 9 to iOS 10. And then we would cry because eventually we were down to one iOS 9 device. Because if everyone would say, oh, but it's asked me, and we'd be like, what are you doing? Don't do that. They're like, no, sorry. We didn't mean to. We thought we should upgrade. What the fuck? What are we talking? Don't do that. It's all. But you couldn't turn off the notification. You just couldn't. It was just a killer. It was terrible. Like I said before, BLE support. So most of your IOP medical devices use BLE in some fashion. So the insulin pumps that people wear, those are Bluetooth connected to their phones. The nasal simulation device we were working with, Bluetooth connected. Everything in the medical device world that's interacting with an app is typically Bluetooth connected. And typically you can only do a small amount of stuff in these apps without connections to the devices. So if you want to have up-to-date information as to what's going on your device or how often you're treating or what your insulin levels are, you need to be connected to that. So a simulator is basically going to cover things like, I logged into the application. The application launched and I saw the home page. Because that's all you can really get away with testing on a simulator. Because everything else is going to require up-to-date information. So I've gotten to my conclusion, and I still have time left. But it's a huge time-consuming process. I cannot underscore how long it took us to write this document. We started writing this document in November. We finished it on the last day of April. It was over 100 pages long in the end. There were hundreds of iterations. We spent the vast majority of our time trying to write this document. In fact, the software was finished for a month, and that's how far we'd gotten behind. If I were to do that again, the VMV document is the main QA deliverable at the end of an iteration. and we run 1 or 2 iterations behind, and that's all. Because it needs to be going and moving with the software. The software had already been started when we started on the V&V process. We'd never written one of these. We didn't know. Nobody knew. There's no information out there. There's no one to talk to. This is all, the whole process of writing a V&V document is typically proprietary and confidential. So no one will give you any information. They just say it takes a long time. Our software team had been going since June, and we were in trouble when we started in November, because we already had a pretty mature product at that point in time. There were going to be a lot of changes, but I think it would have been considerably easier, instead of trying to write the V&V document closer to the end of the project, to have done it in an iterative fashion. We had a hard time getting our customers to review the document and confirm that it was correct, because you look at a 100-page document and you go, yeah, I'll get to that in like a month. I'm not going to read that today. Unless you ride a train and then you're like, I can work while I'm on the train. This seems reasonable. But if you don't, you're like, screw you. That's terrible. I'm not spending half my day doing that. If we provided it at the end of an iteration and required sign-off, that would have forced our customers to provide feedback early and often on the document, which wound up being necessary, because this is their document. Like, we were contracted out. And if the document isn't going to work for them, they're not going to get the approval they need. They're going to be really dissatisfied with the work that we did for them, because the application might be great, but if they can't get FDA approval and they have to rewrite the document, we haven't helped them at all. We have not done our job as a consulting company. Something I didn't talk about much, but we'll talk about a little bit right now, is you have a quality team. When you're making medical device software, you typically have a person whose entire job is to manage your quality management system. You do trainings on this. It's a big part. You have to understand what your requirements are. And then you have a point person whose job is to like dig down in the documents if you have a question and really dig into that. So if you plan to do something with in an automated fashion, you want to make sure you have them on board. Because if they see it late in the process and they say, all these automated tests, like we can't validate the tools that you used, so there's also a process of tool validation. So any tool that you use has to be validated, right? So the language you wrote the software in, interestingly enough, they do not require that to be validated. But your automated testing tool, yes, they would like that to be validated. So the language doesn't have to be validated because it's complicated, but mostly because you're validating the software that you wrote with it. So you kind of get to skip that process. So how we dealt with that with our automated testing tool, because it's difficult to validate a testing tool, is we've showed that we were able to run our automated tests and our manual tests using the same steps and produce the same outcome. So it wasn't doing anything funny behind the scenes. And that was how we managed to make that work. Also, since we had written our tests in Cucumber and our step files matched, or our step files, but our feature files matched what was in the document, if someone had said, this is absolutely not an option, you cannot use this for your V&V runs that are official runs, we would have said, great, that's fine. We have all of our test cases here. And we could have just run them. And we could have continued to reap the benefits of automation by running them with our builds and daily, after, every time we got a build, we could have run it against it. And that wouldn't have mattered, because they don't get in the way so much of your development process, but that document needs to be right. And it needs to pass. And if it doesn't pass, you need to have a plan for how you're going to fix that. But your quality team and your quality person sort of has the final say on any set of tools you use, on anything you agree, they have the final say on everything. So you want them on board, and you want them to be a part of the plan, and you want to involve them early. Because they may decide that they need to actually write another document for your quality management system that talks about how you plan to do automated testing and what that means. Because that's a part of the process. So when you ship off your V&V, you're going to say, I developed it according to my quality management system. And then you're going to send them your quality management system. So you're going to send them a giant box of stuff. It's going to be an inbox, because quality management systems are hundreds to thousands of pages. So we wrote our V&V document in Word because our customers use Word. This was a terrible idea. Don't ever do that. I would never do that again. I would make everyone learn LaTeX. Why? You can check that into version control. You get an automatic change log. Wait, you need a change log? Every time you change that document, you need a change log. If you get that automatically, sweet. You want to see who made what change on what day? You want to blame or praise somebody? You could do that. It's in your version control. Don't write your documents in Word. It's a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. You could write it in Markdown. You could do whatever you wanted. You're going to print it off and hand somebody a PDF. Write your document in whatever format makes it easy for you to manage changes. Because a giant Word document is a mess. You're going to pass around 20 versions of it. You're going to store it on Google Drive. That's going to be your backup. You're going to put it on Google Drive and your wiki as your backup. This is terrible. It's a terrible, 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 terrible idea. And you're going to lose your changelog because you're maintaining that manually. It's not automatically maintained for you. That's a lot of work. You do not want to get involved in that. In general, I can say it was very interesting to test medical devices. It was a lot of fun. It was an interesting process. It was a lot of work. If I were to do it again, like I said, I would make a lot of changes in how we did that. I would start early. I would, be really clear with my quality management team. And I would plan, ideally, when I'm running QA, I like to be able to QA everything within a day. So someone gives me a build, I like to have it QA'd fully within a day because we need to be able to do hot fixes. This is actually, I have a hot fix going out today for my new job. We got a build last night. It'll be QA'd by 4 p.m. today. And we need to be able to do that on a regular basis. But in this process, we couldn't, which is really frustrating. If you like to be able to move fast, you will not move fast when you do this. You will have to go slow. It is a requirement. But you can move faster if you do things earlier in the process, and you don't let it wait to the end. And you have deliverables, assigned deliverables, your own sprint, your own everything, your own Trello board. Like when we had our tasks on our Trello board, things would sit in the QA section because we just had one column. Our work wasn't fully reflected. This was a big problem when you're a consultant because they're wondering why they're spending so much money on QA because they can't see the work that you're doing. So you need to make sure that you have documented what your process is. And ideally, I would move the stories to an entirely different board that illustrated, we did our initial checks, we're writing our automated tests, we've added everything to the V&V. Now the story is done. And it's not done until it's in the V&V. Because that is when that feature is complete, from my perspective. So you want to which basically means it's like almost an entirely different software project. You sort of like handed somebody something, and then you've said, do your project and your process on it. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Lydia.